Good morning, everyone. So today I am going to talk about an idea that has been rolling around my head for probably 20, 25 years. Just not a major topic for me, but just sort of a side topic. And it regards the symbolism of the Day of Atonement. Some symbolism is really clear, such as Jesus being our Passover. I think that Bible makes that fairly clear. However, much of the time when we have symbolism or interpret prophecy from the Bible, it's more of a gray area. A lot of times it doesn't just nail it down. And we do have our traditional beliefs and things like that. And there's a good chance they're probably right, but we don't know for sure. It's not the same as a thus saith. So, I'm going to give an alternate viewpoint of one of those things, and hopefully nobody here is offended by hearing that. But the thing I want to talk about has been taught in the church for probably the whole time Mr. Armstrong started teaching stuff. I mean, it's a very long held, as long as I can remember. But anyway, it's one of those things that I've always just wondered about, if it really was accurate. And so I was going to just give those thoughts here today. And Neil, did you get my slides? So if you could show slide 1. Let's see if we can get slide 1 going. Hopefully it looks good enough people can see it. Now I have it here, which I know is too small. Okay, so this is my quick chart of what I would say the traditional viewpoint of how the holy days map to the end time events. And so we have up there, I have 7 seals, which the 7th seal is the 7 trumpets, and the 7th trump is 7 bowls, all of those activities. And I put trumpets with a question mark. I don't know for sure if we say that part of trumpets or not, but Christ's return for sure, just about everybody agrees, is pictured by trumpets, Christ's return. And then the first resurrection is also pictured by a day of trumpets. And then we have Satan is bound for 1,000 years, and that is what we feel the atonement maps to. And then the Feast of Tabernacles we feel is pictured by the 1,000-year millennium. I guess that's redundant, right? And then some of these other activities aren't really mapped that I can tell to one of our holy days. Like, well, of course, Revelation is a large book, and there's a lot of stuff in there that might not exactly correspond. But like Satan being released, I don't see that celebrated in one of the holy days. I guess I could look at this. So Satan's army is released, and then he attacks the saints, and Satan cast into the lake of fire. Now, we do feel like the second resurrection and the events of Ezekiel 37, where the valley of dry bones and all of Israel's come back to life, we feel that's the last great day probably. You know, that's what we usually hear. And the final judgment, last great day. And then the new heavens and the new earth and the rest of eternity, I've got last great day with a question mark there because I'm not sure what we teach exactly on that or what people's feelings are. So, now one thing about the atonement is it does picture Satan, and when I say does, obviously these are some opinions. I mean, I can't point to the exact verse that says this, but we do feel like it points to Satan being bound because they have the goat that's released, all sins are put on its head, and it's released with a strong man into the wilderness. Of course, there's another goat that we feel where the sins are put on Jesus, well, the goat we feel like represents Jesus. And then the other thing about atonement is Hebrews talks about Jesus going into the high priest going into the inner sanctum once a year, and that Jesus has done that once for all. And so we believe that atonement sacrifice goes for the entire world instead of, compared to Passover, which goes for the firstborn, which we feel like those called now are the firstborn. So that's a lot of the reasoning and explanation of what we talk about nowadays. So the one thing about this whole explanation that I have the most trouble with is the mapping of atonement to the first time Satan is bound. And so I'm going to give my reasoning for that. So atonement probably has the most symbolism of any of the holy days. Now, several of them have several, but like I said, we have the two goats, and also we have the fast. It's in addition to the priest going in the once. So there's a lot going on with atonement. Now, in Revelation talks about Satan is put away 2 different times. The first time before the 1,000 years, but the second time is when it's permanent. He's put into the lake of fire permanently as part of the final judgment. In my mind, the symbolism of the escaped goat could apply to either one of those time periods. I mean, it's both symbolizing Satan being put out. Now, Hebrews 9, as I mentioned, talks about the symbolism of atonement. And it says, speaking of Jesus, it says, quote, with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having attained eternal redemption. And so that's where we get the concept that that sacrifice goes for everybody, not just the firstborn. And it seems to me that this part of the symbolism more closely fits with the great white throne judgment period when all mankind will be there. And so there's a dual nature also of atonement, the 2 goats. And I feel like that also corresponds more to the day of judgment than the first putting out of Satan, which binding of Satan there, right before the 1,000 years, seems like almost a trivial event compared to a lot of these other events. And so that's why I've wondered why we feel that. Okay, now, just for a minute, assuming that atonement does match to the final judgment, well, what do we do with the Feast of Tabernacles? It'd be out of order if we said it's still mapped to the to the millennium. It wouldn't fit. So here's what I think could be the explanation for that. So, atonement has a very somber tone. And that's another reason I feel like it could map to the final judgment. Because I feel like a lot of people are not going to be happy, even the saved ones. It's not going to be too much cheering when you see all of these other people being condemned forever. I feel like it will be a somber event. I really don't think it's going to be a party in that sense. Now, of course, those saved are going to be, actually the firstborn will already have had their party, if you want to call it that, 1,000 years before. Anyway, let's see, I've lost my place here. Okay, now, but when it comes to the Feast of Tabernacles, so atonement has a somber tone. Feast of Tabernacles has a happy tone to it, all right? It's associated with joy, and I think no way to dispute that, right? It's represents a happy time. And also, we feel like it represents the people tabernacling with God. So now the millennium checks both of those boxes. It's a much happier time than the society we live in now. And Jesus will be living with man, tabernacling. However, there is another time period that also checks those same two boxes, and I feel like checks them stronger than that. And that is the period of the new heavens and the new earth. And I'll read Revelation 21. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also there was no more sea. The eye John saw the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself would be with them and be their God. And one of the other translations says, will tabernacle with them. But this says, will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more sorrow, nor death, nor crying. There will be no pain, for the former things have passed away. So it's talking about God the Father coming down. So it appears this is when God the Father joins his Son in tabernacling with men. So in that sense, I feel like the tabernacling part of tabernacles is a stronger indication of that time period. It's also a lot happier time period than the millennium. Now the millennium, I feel like it's going to be great, but it won't be perfect like this time period is. And one reason I say that, for one reason, is people can expect a horrible battle at the end of that time. Revelation 20, and this is the English Revised Version. This is verse 7. When the 1,000 years are ended, Satan will be made free from his prison. He will go out to trick the nations known as Gog and Magog. Satan will gather the people for battle. There will be more people than anyone can count, like sand on the seashore. And we know God easily dispenses with that battle with some fireworks and stuff. But anyway, we see that a multitude of people, even though they've been living without Satan's influence, still converted quickly over to Satan's viewpoint. They allowed him to be tricked. And I think it's not too much of a stretch to say these people did not really love God in the first place. Hard to say, but there's something not right about them. This passage also illustrates another reason millennium won't be as happy, is sin will still be present. And there's that famous verse in Zechariah 14, which is a very positive statement, in tone, but it does add a note of warning. And this is Zechariah 14, starting in verse 16. And obviously this is about the Feast of Tabernacles. It shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So we feel like people during the millennium, we think this is the start of millennium, are going to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whichever of the families don't come to Jerusalem to worship the King, Lord of hosts, that they'll have no rain. If the family of Egypt doesn't come up, they'll have no rain. And they will receive plague, which the Lord strikes the nations who don't come up. So this verse shows us that there will be sin because they're refusing to do what God told them. In addition, it tells us that there will be limited drought and plague. It won't be anything like we have today, I don't feel like. But, it's obvious it won't. But God will allow curses to happen during that time to try to correct people. Isaiah 65:20 says, no longer will there be an infant who only lives a few days, or an old person who does not live out his days. For the youth will die at the age of 100, and the one, and the New King James translates this as the sinner. As the sinner who does not reach the age of 100 will thought to be accursed. So, so that verse appears to be talking about the millennium. Again, it's a positive tone verse because it's saying there won't be child infancy. You won't have stillbirths. People will live at a natural, long, healthy life. Very positive. It just gives that another warning that I'm picking up for this message, that some people will be accursed, and surely it's from their own sin. It doesn't come out and say it, but that's a pretty safe assumption. And second, even though it's at the end of a long and happy life, that people will still die in the millennium. So now, I still think the Feast of Tabernacles could point to that still. I just feel like it's stronger pointing to the new earth thing. So Neil, if you could pull up my second slide. I don't know how, maybe I should use even bigger font, put less stuff on it. So the first little bit is the same as the other. I still feel like that Christ's return corresponds to trumpets. Satan being bound, I don't feel like it's really represented in the holy days, but it would fall in under the trumpets, because I feel like the first resurrection would fall under trumpets. And I've got that out of order there. I corrected it on my sheet, but and this is a little side note, if you read just Revelation, you might think Satan's bound after the first resurrection. But if you put it together with, I think it's Thessalonians, it says that the dead are raised when Christ returns. So the first resurrection and Christ's return, I feel like, are essentially simultaneous. But anyway, and we'll skip down to Satan being cast into the lake of fire would map to atonement, as I feel like. So the 1,000-year millennium could be viewed as the 10 days between atonement and trumpets. And then I still don't have Satan being released in that battle being represented by a specific holy day. And then since atonement is after the millennium, I have the last great day. Well, so atonement would encompass all the events of the final judgment. And then I have the new heavens and new earth, and the rest of eternity symbolized by the last great day and Feast of Tabernacles. So anyway, that's just some thoughts on the subject. I actually don't hold them so firmly. I don't think they're not like etched into my being like you're supposed to keep the Sabbath or anything like that. End time prophecy is not an area that I'm all that studied up on. So I would be more than happy to hear if people's got, good verses that show me, hey, you really missed this point that completely blows your case out of the water. That's fine. If you can do that, I'll be happy for that. And so I really don't expect people to adopt these opinions, but I thought it might be useful to at least stimulate the thought process and maybe some study on the subject. Anyway, thank you. Happy